and welcome to another episode of Tesseract Talks, the place where we put the spotlight on new tech trends. I'm your host, Marko Rukavina, the founder and CEO of Tesseract Analytics. Data privacy has moved from being a legal checkbox to a core business and product concern. Regulations are tightening, consumer expectations are rising, and companies are struggling to operationalize privacy at scale. Today, we are joined by Max Anderson, a co-founder and head of product at Ketch, a data privacy platform helping enterprises move from reactive compliance to proactive data governance. Max, welcome to Tesseract Talks.
Thank you for having me, Marco. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And before we dive in, can you briefly tell us about your background and what led you to co-found Ketch?
Yeah, certainly I think my background is absurd. I studied Chinese literature in school, but I've always grown up around building things, technology. I was lucky to grow up in a household where it wasn't football. It was super nerdy stuff. I started my career primarily making software in the ad tech and martech space, obsessed about how do you sell people more stuff and how do you know who to target with advertisements and how do you do segmentation better and prove that your investments are profitable. And I hooked up with my co-founders of Ketch at a company called Crux. We ended up selling that company to Salesforce, and it was there when, the rise of GDPR loomed large, and the Salesforce team asked us to run the data privacy initiative for GDPR in the Marketing Cloud. And that was this honestly profoundly dreadful project. It was very scary. It felt like a lot of pressure. I didn't necessarily know anything, but I cut my teeth in privacy there, after which we pitched, trying to sell Salesforce Privacy Studio or whatever silly name we came up with. We were unsuccessful in doing that at Salesforce. So we decided, this is a real problem. It's a hard problem. And of course, we should totally start a company. So that's kind of the lineage.
Great. And what problem did you personally experience that made data privacy feel fundamentally broken in most organizations?
Good question. Well, we should start internally, right? My first exposure to data privacy was at Salesforce. And it's not a knock on any company, but it's a nascent market, right? So broken is a stretch. It was nascent. It was non-existent. And so the idea of adding this kind of control layer into every data processing pipeline and making sure that you're respecting people's choices at the attribute level was just a preposterously large ask. And so certainly at Salesforce, it didn't exist. Now, when we started the company, the hypothesis you have to generate, like what's going to be your insertion point? How are you going to start? And we did a survey. We did a bunch of network traffic analysis of all these companies, top 100 Comscore websites and so on and so forth. And we basically started with, this dreadful cookie banner thing that we all use every day on the internet. And we wanted to look at the relationship between a choice that someone makes and the network activity and the data collection that happens as a consequence of that choice. And I was even surprised. I suspected it wasn't really rigorously implemented, but I was stunned that basically every single company's privacy experience was effectively a facade. It was a total sham and none of it worked. And so, of course, we thought, let's make at least a cookie banner that works and, we'll go from there. But that, to me is like the ultimate signal that this problem is not being solved, certainly not in the way that, we went and solved it at Salesforce.
And my next question is a bit related to this. When you look at the enterprises today, what are the biggest structural problems you see in how they approach data privacy and consent management?
Yeah, there are a few. And I think, again, a lot of this just goes back to nascent market. The discipline, right, on the people level is you've got people that own this that are legal practitioners, but the problems to be solved well necessitate a really strong technical representation in the organization. So there's certainly an understaffing issue. There is a right staffing issue where you've got privacy experts, but also the data teams and the engineering teams who show up and they're, invested in making the actual ambition come to life, because you can't just staple privacy on top of an existing data platform. It doesn't work. And then there's an interesting tension kind of between those who want to operationalize data and then those who want to safeguard it. So if you're the privacy pro, you kind of hold the bag of risk. And I've been there. It's really a very sobering and alarming position to be in. Your job is to make sure you don't do something silly. And of course, you've got people that want to operationalize data and put it to work and grow the business with it. And there's this kind of tension that happens between those various departments where one says, we're going to turn the faucet off. And the other says, if you leave the faucet on, I'm going to get fired. And so this undercurrent is certainly problematic. The last thing I would say is there is not enough C-suite attention to the issue. right? I don't think enforcement has come to the point yet where an executive says, I do want to spend $500,000 or $1 million at an enterprise tier to solve this problem correctly, which is what it takes. So enforcement is, of course, on the rise, getting better. It's progressing, but that also creates some challenge or dysfunction to adoption at the enterprise.
And Ketch often talks about treating privacy as data control, not just compliance. What does that mean in practice, and why is that distinction important?
Yeah, maybe it's a wonky position, but if you're a compliance pro, you're going to come at this problem from policies, attestations, training, checklists, and documents to assert that you've got all your controls in place and you've done everything that you're supposed to do. Our perspective, of course, we come at this from the data management lens, right? We're building data pipelines and we're actually putting data to work. That's the place where privacy must exist to be real. It's one thing to make an employee take a training and attest that the policy that the company has is going to be followed. It's another thing to actually implement the controls at the processing layer. And so we've always felt like for data privacy to actually thrive and be a real thing, it needs to live inside of the data infrastructure. Instead of this being an attachment to, some ambition or goal, it's infrastructure that lives right alongside everything that is used to process data and derive value or benefit from it.
Can you share a concrete example of how a customer used Ketch to solve a real privacy challenge and what measurable impact it had on their business or operations?
Yeah, of course. I'll pick a favorite. So one of the things, maybe a very unpopular product decision, early days in the build out. So again, for the listeners, maybe you're tired of me harping on this, but the DNA or the background of us and the company is important and instructive in this one. In the marketing advertising world, there's this consumer identity problem, right? You want to know that the individual who's getting marketed on their computer is the same person as the one that you're, sending ads on their phone or their smart TV, so on and so forth. And so there's this kind of foundational layer inside of any MarTech stack, which is consumer identity management. And we felt like privacy needed the same infrastructure, right? If I make a choice to opt out of the sale of personal information or don't use my data for analytics, advertising, whatever the use case is, it is a person level choice. It is not a device level choice. And so early days in the building of Ketch, we built the same infrastructure we built at the last company, but we're using it for privacy. And I can assure you, nobody cared. I mean, the number of meetings I went into where people are saying, shut up, I'm buying a cookie banner. I don't know what you think you're selling me, but it's very different. It was very unpopular, but back to my point about legislation, regulation. A couple of years ago, the California Attorney General did a big sweep of a class or category of companies. And for those who don't know, a sweep is basically one of the instruments that an enforcement agency can use to dictate or instruct the market on what matters and their definition of the rules. Not dissimilar from a settlement, but these sweeps precede settlements. And we had probably 4 customers, maybe 3 customers that were caught up in the sweep. And I remember they had all implemented this cross-device thing. So when you opt out on your browser, it works on your phone, so on and so forth. And so I remember calling all 3 of them frantically in the day I read about the sweep. I said, "Hey, what happened? Are you good?" And they all said, "Certainly, no, we're fine." They did the test on cross-device. Everything works. We're fine. Please stop calling. Whatever they said. And there were a couple companies that settlements came out the other end, and that was $1 million plus $2.5 million in some cases of damages that were paid to the state of California as a result of not being able to effectuate a consumer's choice as it relates to privacy and across devices. And the products they were using were localized to a single device, and they weren't able to effectuate or honor that choice across devices. So it's not necessarily revenue driving, but certainly cost savings. And it was a huge validation for me that these silly choices we make that we passionately believe in actually matter, many years later.
Yeah. And looking ahead, how do you see data privacy evolving over the next few years, especially now as AI, real-time data usage, and global regulations continue to expand?
Yeah, you can't go 45 minutes now without saying AI, right? Well, I think probably twofold. On one branch of the tree, I think we're going to see more of the same, where more of the same is incremental enforcement with higher sophistication. Over the last 2 years, we've seen people and enforcement agencies really sharpen up around the nuances technically in this space, and the enforcement actions are much, much more sophisticated. I think we'll see more of that. I think we will also see more amendments or changes to regulations, making certain things more clear, more onerous, more work for in my team, and certainly privacy pros everywhere. I think that's a durable, consistent trend. On the AI side, it's harder to investigate that if you're an enforcement agency, but I do think we will see very targeted and explicit AI-specific enforcement actions because these enforcement agencies need to be able to demonstrate expectations through enforcement. And so there might be some cherry picking of companies and some picking on of companies for no other reason than to set standards for the market to adhere to in the future.
To set some examples to the rest.
Exactly.
As we wrap up, today's conversation highlights how data privacy has evolved from a compliance obligation into a core data and product strategy. Enterprises that treat privacy as infrastructure rather than a checkbox will definitely be better positioned for trust, scale, and innovation. And Max, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspective and these valuable insights. I hope we'll see you again, either on Tesseract Talks or perhaps on some event in person.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you for having me, Marko. This was a pleasure.
Great. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in, and make sure to follow us for more similar conversation on the future of technology trends. Bye.